Hello everyone. After my review of the MIG 205DS, I decided to contact Yeswelder to see what they would say about my machine topping out at 160 amps. As a quick recap, during my review I measured the actual output of the welder and found that when using 030 or 035-inch wire with the machine set for the correct wire size, the output maxed out at 160 amps. If I used 035-inch wire but set the machine for 030-inch wire, it would essentially trick the welder into upping the wire speed, and the welder did output around 250 amps when set that way, but it didn't run very well when set like that. Since this is advertised as a 200 amp machine and the settings go to 205 amps, I decided to contact Yeswelder to see what they would say about this behavior. They responded fairly quick and said that their technical team was out for Chinese New Year, but they asked me for my Amazon order number. I provided the order number and I explained that I really just wanted to know if this was normal behavior or if there was possibly an issue with my welder. They responded again a couple days later and said that their tech team was still out, but they had issued me a full refund so I could order a replacement. I did order a second welder with the refund so I could see if it behaved the same as the first machine, and this is that second machine. I'll talk about this replacement welder in a moment, but since this welder showed up, I also got a reply from the technical team at Yeswelder. They said that in extreme cases, the welder can reach 200 amps, but in order to make the machine last longer, it doesn't normally run at these extremes. They worded it a little bit differently. I think there's kind of some translation issues. What they technically said was that they don't normally set it to run at the extremes, but I think that really just means the welder, the way it's set up with its synergic kind of auto set settings, that those settings won't normally cause the welder to run it at 200 amps. Either way, that response leads me to believe that the behavior I found in my first review is totally normal. I imagine that when I ran the incorrect wire size setting, I was kind of forcing an extreme case, and the welder did provide higher output. But unfortunately, it sounds like the normal use, they don't expect the welder to reach 200 amps of output, even when set at max, which the display says is 205 amps. I'm still going to test this replacement out to see if it behaves the same, but I imagine it'll be just like the first one. Yeswelder support was responsive and helpful, so that's good. And it's not like it's a catastrophic issue that it maxes out at 160 amps most of the time. But it's a shame that the main setting that you adjust is amperage, and the setting displayed on the screen goes to 205, but the amount of output that you actually get out doesn't nearly match that setting. Yeswelder did say that they valued my feedback and that their technical team would review my testing, so maybe they'll change something in the future. With that out of the way, let's take a quick look at the welder. Then I'm actually going to take it apart and then we'll do some testing. The door of this second welder isn't bent as bad as the first one, but it is still bent. I believe it's due to the way that the cables are actually packaged on this side of the welder inside of the box. So it probably doesn't take much pressure on the side of the box to push those cables against the welder and bend the door. This one does at least open and close without having to bend it back first, so it wasn't quite as bad as the first one. The work clamp appears to be the same clamp. Outward appearance, they're pretty much identical, but the clamp that came with the new welder, it feels stiffer. It doesn't actually flex nearly as much as the first one did. And I started to suspect that it was actually slightly thicker material. And that's why it's actually not connected to the cable right now, because I actually took them both off of the cables and weighed them just to see. And this one, the new one, actually does weigh almost a half an ounce more than the old one, and the old one is just feels just that little bit more flimsy and flexible. And you can see, just from the pressure of the spring where it's hooked, I mean the spring is practically poking through the other side. It's just the old one is just that little bit thinner, I think, and it really makes the clamp that came with the replacement welder just that little bit better. Now, I don't know if that's just due to sample variation or if they actually made a change, but either way, the second clamp is a little bit better. The electrode holder, on the other hand, is definitely a completely different model, and it's the cheapest electrode holder I've ever seen. Now, it may not really be that much less expensive to make than the other one, but I don't think it's just going to be as high amperage of a design. It's not going to handle as much amperage because this is actually just a piece of formed steel. And you can see a magnet very much sticks to it. So it's copper plated, but it's definitely just steel. And the cable is mounted all the way back here, so that current has to flow all the way through this little piece of stamped steel up to where the rod is mounted. So it's going to heat up. It's not really going to hold nearly as much amperage as, if it was a copper piece, or even if it was just the style of the other one where it is actually just copper plated cast iron, but it's a more solid block and the cable connects all the way up here. So pretty cheap. And even the jaws are just this same piece of stamped steel just rolled over in the end. So pretty cheap electrode holder. And the cables are exactly the same. They're the same copper plated aluminum strands. So aluminum cable. So it seems that for better or for worse, there is a little bit of variation in terms of the exact accessories that you'll get with one of these welders. The welder itself sounds like it has a loose screw or something rolling around inside it. So I'd planned to take it apart and take a peek inside anyways, but since it sounds like it has something loose rolling around in there, I'm going to open it up before I even power it up and see if I can find out what's loose in there and just take a look at it. In fact, I'm going to do that first, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, I got the welder apart, and what was rattling around in there, sure enough, was a screw. It's just this little Phillips screw that was rattling in there. I don't see anywhere that it's missing from, so I think it was just a mistake, just an extra screw that ended up being left in there. But the good news is it's not like a component that snapped off the board or, something that had come loose or something. So just a stray screw. It does have this sheet of plastic to insulate the board from the case. And more so than just being a nice touch, I think it is strictly, completely required on this because these two screws stick out so far that you can actually see the mark on the plastic in the shape of that screw where the case has probably already been bumping up against it, because these stick out so far that they're essentially above flush. So the case actually pretty much just rests on those screws. So this plastic isn't optional. And I'll just give you a little bit of a look down inside there. You won't be able to tell all that much from this view, but you can get a general idea of how it's put together. All right, so it turns out just about everything is slightly different on this welder than on the other one. That's not completely true, but as we saw with the accessories, they're pretty different. Interestingly, the bags that the manuals and accessories come in are different. I know it's a small thing, but they're different. Even the manuals themselves are slightly different. They do both still come with Teflon tape though, for no reason. Anyway, it's just funny how many little differences there are. And actually, even this little tag that's on the power cord for the welder, the tag is still there. It's still essentially the same warning, but it is worded much differently. It says, must rest welder for 2 minutes when switching from 110 to 220 volts. So that's pretty much what I assumed based on the last one, but that's obviously a much better translation, much clearer about what it's telling you. As for performance, this welder actually didn't run as well with 035 wire as the old welder did when set properly for 035 wire. The first one, when set for 035, it maxed out at 160 amps, just like it did on 030 wire, but it at least still ran fairly smooth. Maybe not quite as smooth as 030, but pretty good. This welder actually ran very rough, very poor when set to 035 wire and running 035 wire. I actually had to turn the voltage down to -5 in order to get it to run very smooth at all. Once I did that, it ran okay, but then it was only giving me like 140 amps of output. So when running 035 wire with this machine and set to 035, I was actually getting less output than I was with the previous version. And when running kind of the default, automatic settings, it didn't run well at all. So I actually changed it to the 030 wire setting, still running 035 wire, and it actually ran a lot better. So it's almost like the wire feed speed is not as fast as it thinks it is when set to 035 wire, because I had to lower the voltage to get it to run well, and then when I tricked the wire feed speed into running faster by setting it to 030, it actually ran better. And as we saw with the first machine, I had to set the voltage at +10 when set up that way. So when I was running 035 wire but set to the 030 setting, I had to run a +10 voltage to get it to run smooth. With this welder, I only had to run about a +4 or +5 voltage to get it to run smooth. At that point, it did run smooth, and it ran a bit more consistently than the other machine did when maxed out like that. But I was only getting about 190 amps out of this machine versus 215 out of the other machine. Now, when running 035 wire, if I turned the amperage down, so if I just adjusted the output lower, it did run much smoother, but there again, the output got much lower. I had the machine set at about 130, and I was actually getting around 85 amps out. It was running pretty smooth, but again, I was only getting about 85 amps out of it. So basically, 035 wire, just in general, was kind of all over the place with this machine. It ran rough unless you tweaked settings. It ran better if you set it for 030 wire. And, it was kind of strange. Interestingly, when I switched to 030 wire and set it for 030 wire, it ran very smooth at multiple settings. I could run it at different settings. It ran very smooth, all in automatic without having tweaked the voltage up or down at all. So with 030 wire, ran very well. And I got quite a bit more amperage out of this machine than I did the first one when just set to 030 without changing anything. So with this machine set to 030, set at 200 amps, I was actually getting somewhere between 170 to 180 amps out of it a lot of the time. Now it bounced up and down a little bit. Sometimes it would bounce as low as 160. Sometimes it would bounce very close to 200, which that's actually a lot more what I would expect out of a 200 amp MIG welder versus the old machine, which was just pretty much held at 160 no matter what. So with this second machine, with 030 wire, I'm getting performance pretty much like I would expect. Pretty close to 200 amps output. If the machine is maxed, bouncing around a little bit, but it is, when running MIG, it's constant voltage, not constant amperage, so the amperage is going to fluctuate, so that's not surprising. But I was getting much closer to what I would expect to get out of a 200 amp machine, and it ran very smooth. So it's just interesting to see just how much different this machine runs than the last one. There definitely seems to be some, sample variation with this machine. There's going to be little differences between the welders based on the exact performance you get and the accessories that you get included with it. But either way, I just really wanted to do a little bit of an update because Yeswelder did refund all of my money so that I could buy a second one, and I wanted to go ahead and buy a second one and see, how it differed, if it differed at all from the original. And it turns out there was a lot more small differences than I expected, both in terms of the included accessories and slight differences in the way it ran in various settings. So that's it for today, just a quick update. If you have any questions or if there's anything else you would like me to test out with this welder, just let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.